community is very important. We celebrate holidays together, and we support each other. And a kibbutz without community is just, kibbutz is so much more than just the homes and the fields and the dining room. It's community, and community is what builds resilience, and it's a very important aspect of kibbutz life. So our kibbutz is located 2 kilometers. That's about 1 mile away from the border with the Gaza Strip, which means that when there are rockets that are launched at us, we get an incoming rocket warning. And we know that we have between 0 to 10 seconds from the second you hear that warning till the second you hear the explosion to get to someplace safe.
That's nothing. For some people,
it's nothing. Our houses are small, but still. So each house within 7 kilometers of the border, because of the situation of the mortars, which often don't even trigger a warning. You just hear boom and you know that you got to take cover because there might be more. So every house within 7 kilometers of the border has to have a safe room. And so it's a reinforced concrete room with concrete walls and ceiling to withstand the impact of a rocket. And that we have a special door that you pull closed and click, and there are prongs that go into the walls, and that's what would prevent the door from blowing open if the house is impacted elsewhere and there's an implosion. And there's a heavy iron sleeve on the window that you pull closed in times of missile fire. And if there's periods of threat, I close it beforehand. I don't wait. And it has thick glass as well. So ever since when I went to live there in 1975, it was not a war zone. It was peaceful and quiet, and sometimes there were tensions, but not rocket fire. There were times when there were threats of infiltration, but we have a fence that encircles the community, and there's also a fence along the border, and the IDF are there, and I've always felt secure living there. Since the Hamas started coming into power around 2000, we started getting rocket fire. So at the beginning, it wasn't where we live. It was further up north to Sderot, which is a city that's about 1 kilometer away from the border. And that's a nice big target to shoot at. When they would shoot at us, especially then, the rockets were not very advanced and they couldn't really aim very well. So most of the time the rockets would just explode in the fields and didn't do much damage. So in the early days, they didn't bother really shooting at us a lot. But as their capabilities improved, so did their aim and the rocket fire. And I think the first rocket that exploded in my community was about 2006. So that was a year after we pulled out of the Gaza Strip. You know, people say that the talk against the occupation, and we are not occupying the Gaza Strip. In 2000,
that's what I want to say. Where you live, it's not considered a settlement. No, it's territory, and it's not disputed.
Where I live is Israel proper. It's not disputed territory at all. There have been certain maps. There was a period where there was the Geneva Initiative, where there was a plan to swap land for peace. And if that had gone through, then much of our fields, the Western fields, would have gone over to Gaza. The border would have been closer to us. But theoretically, it would have been a peaceful border, so that shouldn't have been a problem. And we would have been more than happy to give up land, to have a peaceful border, and to live in cooperation and collaboration with our neighbors. But that was never accepted, like any of the other peace agreements that were offered to the Hamas. To the Palestinians at first, and now to the Hamas. It wasn't always, the Hamas only came into power in the early 2000s. So until 2011, we did not have safe rooms. It hadn't been required legally. And the first round of violence that I personally experienced was the escalation that happened in 2008-9. And for that escalation, I evacuated my kibbutz in 2007, 6, 7. We already realized that if there is an escalation, we're going to have to evacuate, and we didn't want to rely on the government doing that. We had our own plan in place. So when this escalation happened, most of the community evacuated. I too wanted to evacuate, but I had dogs, so it was complicated. But as I said, to be in a war zone without a safe place, without a safe room, is terrifying. And I had, just a month before, I had lost my husband. He suffered from bipolarity and committed suicide in November 2008. So I did not have the wherewithal to remain behind in a war zone without someplace safe to be, so I also evacuated them. In subsequent escalations, I stayed behind. I was stronger. As I said, we got our safe rooms in 2011, and the safe room that were, until they built the safe rooms, we had bomb shelters. About 6 bomb shelters for the whole community. We're a community of 430. Well, we were, as of October 7th, before, like in 2008-9, I think we're a little bit less. But with 6 bomb shelters spread around the community and 0 to 10 seconds to take cover, it's not effective. Bomb shelters were fine for a different kind of war, for the Yom Kippur War, for the Sinai campaign, for wars that came before that. For rocket fire, 0 to 10 seconds, not enough. So in my house, I have my own bomb shelter, as I said, the safe room, and I do not sleep there. Some people sleep there all the time. People that have children, that's often the children's room, so that if there's rocket fire in the middle of the night, you don't have to start waking the kids up and trying to run with them. They're already there. So throughout the years, there have been escalations, periods of rocket fire, or even between the escalations, there have been periods of sporadic rocket fire. And the way I deal with things like that is I don't do victim well. So when there's an escalation, when something happens, I blog, I vlog, I opened a Facebook group that now has 13,500 followers. I blog for the Times of Israel. I give interviews. I do Facebook Lives. I talk about what's happening. I tell the world what's happening, because what goes on in Gaza when there's an escalation is horrible. But it ain't no picnic on our side either. And the world does not realize that, does not understand that. Certainly not until October 7th. Until October 7th, the world thought that everybody who lived where I do, runs around with a flak jacket and an Uzi, and like we're all little soldiers, and they don't realize that we're just normal people.
Yeah.
We're parents and children and grandparents, and there are quadriplegics and elderly with walkers and all sorts.